Today I want to talk about binding and banishing a person, because I saw this recently in comments on a group. It was a suggestion for somebody who was dealing with a narcissist, and the idea was to bind and banish the person. And I find a bit of a problem in that, so I just wanted to go through what it actually means, so you can be more aware, I suppose. Alright, so let's get into that. Okay, so binding and banishing. Oh, and if you do like my content, please do all the usual stuff. Click the like button, subscribe, and the notification bell so you know when videos are coming out. And you can also hit the join button, and if you really want to support the channel, there's two levels: one to just simply support the channel, and another one to join the demonic wealth web. And there is a video on my channel describing that a bit more, but I don't want to get into that now. All right, so binding and banishing. Now, when we're dealing with a person, when we talk about binding a person and then banishing them, it does kind of make sense, because you would be binding them or wrapping them up so that they can't be malicious or anything like that, and then you banish them, you get rid of them. All right. It makes sense from that perspective. There is a bit of a problem though in the binding aspect. When we're doing magic, we include our own energy. It doesn't matter what magic it is, we include our own energy, and that energy gets entangled and wraps up in the spell working or whatever it is we're actually doing. If we are involved in the magic, we are entangling our energy into it. It's really as simple as that. So when we're doing a binding on somebody, we are actually binding ourselves to that person. And in the case of somebody you want to get rid of, that's not always something you want to consider doing. Now, the idea of binding a person to stop them from being malicious or stop them from doing particular acts, even if it's to stop them from harming themselves, this has largely become quite popular, I think, from movies and TV series. The one that always comes to mind is The Craft, when they are binding Nancy. But, you know, as I say, there's many reasons why you would bind somebody. It can be to prevent them from harming themselves. It can be to prevent them from harming you or other people. It can be to prevent them from just being a nasty arsehole. But you have to remember that when you're doing a binding, you are also binding yourself to them. So in certain circumstances, that's fine. You may want to bind somebody for a period of time so that they can get through whatever they need to get through. And for that time, you are prepared to bind yourself to them and just make sure they actually get through it. And that's fine. But when you're dealing with somebody like a narcissist who you actually want to get rid of, binding yourself to them is going to be counter to the work you actually want to do. And the reason I say you entangle your energy is really simply because you do. When you are binding a person, you are wrapping them up, you are physically doing something. It might be with a puppet, it might be with a picture of them, you may have tag locks of them, some hair or some nail clippings or something which you can use on a picture or with a puppet or whatever method you're using. You are usually binding them with string or with a ribbon or something which creates that wrapping type of process. And through that wrapping, you know, think of it like this: when you touch something and then you take your hand off, it's almost like there's sticky substance, and that sticky substance is energy. So as you touch a surface, you take your hand off, there's these strands of energy which connect the two surfaces, your hand and the surface you just touched. Now, when you are working magic, you are working specifically with energy. So as you are wrapping this object up in string or ribbon or whatever you're using, you are also that energy is also wrapping around that object, your energy. And that energy then gets tied into the object, which gets tied to the person, because this object is a representation of the person. Going to come back to puppet magic. If you create a puppet, you tie the puppet to the person, and whatever you do to the puppet, it gets done to the person. So, it's not just that connection between the object and the person, it's also the fact that you are actually wrapping your own energy up into the object. So it's energy going from the object to the person, and also from the object to you, and vice versa. Okay, so when you're binding somebody, just remember you are binding yourself to that person, because you are binding yourself to the object which is affecting them. Alright, so to get rid of somebody, I would not suggest binding for this particular reason. There are ways to do this without affecting your energy or tying yourself to the person. You can use energy from elsewhere, but even in that process, you're still going to be using your energy at some point to actually create this thing. But after you have bound up the object, you can then go back and you can pull back your own personal power, your own energy, and keep that object bound. Okay, it's not easy, it's a bit difficult, but the reason I'm actually doing this video is because a lot of people are doing bindings just haphazardly, not considering that they are actually binding themselves to the person that they are doing the binding on. So just bear that in mind when it comes to binding. Now, banishing is a different story. We may consider banishing to be something where you are pushing something away, and through that pushing away, you are using your energy to push them away. And because of what I just mentioned about binding, we may consider that to be the same thing. You are using your energy to banish something. Now, in banishing, there's a slight difference. In fact, we did a great Black Hat chat show, I'll link to it up top here, about banishing rites. And one thing that came out of that, which was actually really, really good, was that when you are doing, if we're talking specifically about banishing rites, like the lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram or something similar, what you are doing in that space is you aren't consciously pushing out stuff that you don't want. You are actually pushing energy out and pulling energy in, and through that process, or the act of actually using names of power and things like that, you are actually raising the vibration in that space. And through that raising of vibration, anything which is lesser to that vibration is pushed away. It cannot stay in that space. So when you are doing a banishing on a person, what you want to aim towards is actually raising yourself above the person, almost becoming vibrationally higher than the person, and who is then lower to you. And through that process, that person cannot stay in your space. They will be pushed away. It's not a case of you physically or mentally or even energetically pushing the person. It's actually creating a space that person cannot exist in. Okay, remember that, bear that in mind. Because if something or someone cannot exist in your space, they will move away. And that's what a banishing really, really is. And you don't, to say we raise our vibration to become higher than the person we're trying to banish, it's probably not actually a really good way of putting it, because that does bring to mind some more recent stuff where people are talking about raising their vibrations, and this leads to the whole idea of that group of people are better than this group of people, which is not true. But what you are trying to do is create a space where that person cannot exist, where that person is not comfortable entering. And that can be done through various types of magic. You can use candle workings. In fact, if you go into hoodoo practices, specifically hot foot, you are actually, if when you hot foot a person, you are actually creating a vibration or an energy where that person doesn't feel comfortable and wants to move, wants to leave that space. So I think you can see how using various different types of magic creates a space, creates an environment, creates an area where a person just doesn't feel comfortable and needs to move out of that environment. That's the type of thing you're aiming for. Alright, so binding and banishing are very different things, very different approaches. Remember that when you're binding, you're wrapping your energy into that magic, and therefore you are tying yourself to the person. And in the instance where you want to get rid of a person, that is counter to the work you're trying to do. However, you can do bindings to help people to get through a particular phase or a particular period in their life which they are finding difficult, and during that phase or that period in their life they could harm themselves. So you want to bind them to prevent them from harming themselves. That's very different to dealing with a narcissist who you are trying to get rid of. So binding means that you are going to tie yourself to the person you are working on. Right, that can then later be released. So it should only be a temporary thing. Then with banishing, it's a completely different approach. You are actually creating a space where that person or thing cannot remain. It's too uncomfortable for that person or thing to actually remain in that space, and therefore it has to leave. Just a quick mention also, I'll probably do something in a later video, but just something to consider is, if you actually want to get rid of somebody from your life, bless them. It's the best approach you can possibly go for, is bless them. Now in that moment you're probably feeling anger and hatred towards this particular person, and you do not think that blessing is something you can handle or want to do. But the question is, do you want to get rid of them? If you want to get rid of them, the easiest way is to bless them. Bless them with a new job in another country, and they cannot resist that. It's a new job, it's sparkly, it's in a new country, it benefits them, it's something that they just cannot say no to, and they will leave you alone. They will go to this new job, they'll become distracted with it, they will be in another country, so they won't be near you. It's the easiest way to get rid of them. And because you're blessing, you're also working with an energy and a vibration which also aids you. If you are doing cursing work constantly, that particular energy is going to affect you also. Remember, what you put out, what energy you put out, you tie yourself to. And what we connect ourselves to also connects to us. So if you're doing or particular work constantly over and over again, you're going to be affected by that work. So if you're doing curses constantly, you're going to end up being cursed yourself. But if you're doing blessings constantly, you're going to end up being blessed yourself. So the easiest way to do this type of work, to try and get rid of somebody, is actually to bless them and get rid of them. And that's the aim. If your aim is to harm them, to get revenge or anything like that, that's fine. That's different. That's completely different. But if your aim is to get rid of them, then get rid of them. Don't go for the revenge and the hatred and the curses and everything else, because that's just going to keep them there. If you want to get rid of them, get rid of them. Plain and simple. Okay, so that's it for this week. As I said, if you enjoy my content, please like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, share, comment, all of the usual things, and hit the join button if you want to support the channel. And I will see you next week. Have a fantastic, magical week. Cheers for now.